Hello, and you are back in the Velvet Room with Jokerthefool. This is our 37th episode, and today we'll be discussing the use of tragedy to push ideology and Calendargate. So we're going to get right into it with the first topic of using tragedy to push ideology. And the specific tragedy we're talking about is the murder of Brianna Ghey. This was a trans-identified male, 16 years old, going to a boarding school, a private school in England, got stabbed 28 times by two teenage classmates who were very unwell. And of course, the fact that this person, Brianna Ghey, identified as trans is, of course, the only reason why this happened. And everyone who isn't completely on board with trans ideology to the umpteenth degree, every point that isn't being absolutely pushed is the reason why this person, Brianna Ghey, died. So you had, I think it was like India Wallaby saying, J.K. Rowling and all these other, TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists. TERFs that's the the ultimate demon if you're trans, right? So all these TERFs are the reason why Brianna Ghey died, and the fact that Brianna Ghey died very tragically, it was a very, very sad event. I know I'm being a bit cheesy, but this was a legitimately sad thing, and it seems like this was a person who was mentally unwell, who was victimized by two other very mentally unwell people. And this is a result. This is a lagging indicator of the complete cultural rot and meltdown we have in the entirety of the West. It's not just the United States. It's basically any modern Western nation, from Western Europe onwards. I'd say Eastern European countries are doing a little bit better and maintaining some decent cultural cohesion. But the West is definitely compromised in a lot of ways culturally, and the fact that stuff like this happens, right? You've got, these murders that happen tragically, and then the fact that if the person falls into one of the optimal groups on the progressive stack, that's used as a pushing point to push that ideology further, rather than say, hey, someone died quite tragically. There was obviously a severe mental health crisis, I would say, in all three of these people, and it wasn't being addressed by the adults around them, right? These were three kids who were mentally unwell. I'm not saying Brianna Ghey was the one who was at fault for this happening, but these two kids were very mentally unwell, completely deranged, decided to take their derangement out on someone else physically with knives, and we are with one less human being on this planet, even if, this person wasn't, like I said, a mentally ill 16-year-old boy that thought he was a girl and was, gassed up by everyone around him that he actually was, because that's the in thing to do right now. Still a human being, still someone whose death should not have happened, and it's still a very tragic thing. And the fact that you have gender ideologues who are using this person's death to push their ideology and to shame and denigrate their ideological enemies is a really bad thing. So I just do not like the fact that when these sorts of things happen, it's not about, hey, we've lost human potential, we don't have someone with us anymore, there's a family that's broken permanently, in a permanent way. That's not the primary thing. The primary thing is, well, who can I go online and shame and blame this death on, rather than the people who did it? And that's the disgusting thing, and that's the message I want to take away, because the fact that Brianna Ghey died, and the fact that Brianna Ghey's death was used to push ideology is not a unique thing. It's not the first time it's happened, and it certainly won't be the last. So it's definitely something you ought to look out for as a trend when any tragedy happens, whether it's a natural disaster being used to push the fact that climate change is happening, or of course any mass shooting being used to push gun control. That's a very common thing. So of course tragedy will be used to push political ideology, and it's the most fervent ideologues that will do this the most and to the most disgusting degree. And this is, right or left. Basically, anyone who's completely sold themselves out to their ideology will do anything to push it or make it seem like it has the most amount of moral capital. I've talked about moral capital before. It's a very important concept. I forget what podcast episode I talked about the concept of moral capital, but if you search on my Substack for moral capital, you will find it. But it's just a very much part of using tragedy to increase your moral capital is a very good thing, saying like, hey, well, this tragedy wouldn't have happened if you all were on board with gender ideology, if you were all on board with gun control, or you were all on board with um, everyone driving electric cars and eating, cricket flour, or whatever the hell is trying to be pushed this day. If you aren't pushing it and something bad happens, then it's your fault. And that's going to be the case with anything. And it goes really past the line that I don't like when people die and then you're using their deaths as basically talking points to push your ideology. That is the disgusting thing, and I don't like it. So the primary thing, the takeaway, is that you had a tragic event happen, and that's the primary thing. And then and then you think, well, why do these sorts of things happen, right? And then what can we do to create a culture where these things happen as little as possible, rather than trying to blame everyone you disagree with ideologically. I think that's all I've got for that topic. And next we're going on to Calendargate. So I didn't want to talk about this originally, but I think I'll give my take on this, and I think this is more culturally relevant thing to talk about than I was going to talk about Trump getting pushed off the ballot. But I don't really think that's, I don't know, that's just more like Trump derangement syndrome end stage, which is just going to keep happening into 24. I think that's a very basic thing. But let's actually talk about the topic in this podcast, Calendargate. So you had, I think it's Ultra Right Beer Company pop up around the time the Bud Light thing happened. So Dylan Mulvaney gets sponsored by Bud Light. Everyone starts boycotting Bud Light and Anheuser-Busch by extension. Ultra Right Beer pops up to sell right-wing conservative beer. And part of, their brand, building their brand, is doing this calendar featuring the most beautiful conservative women of America. So you've got Riley Gaines, and then she's featured pretty prominently. You've got another one, I believe her name is Josie. She goes by the red-headed libertarian, and she is definitely the most prominent one on this calendar. And she was, I'd probably say, the least scantily clad in that one. I'd say it's not even that bad in terms of the amount of skin shown. I mean, Riley Gaines is in a bikini, and that's a little bit racy, but, we live in a very sexualized society today, so that's hardly the most TNA thing you'll see these days, right? But the idea of this was, make a calendar, like a classic pinup girl calendar, something you'd get, back in ye olden times when it was okay to ogle at attractive women, or at least a bit more socially acceptable. It did quite well, I guess. It sold a lot, but a lot of people got up in arms about it. Bryson Gray called it demonic, right? That was his thing, because, it causes men to lust after women, and being lustful is signs of the demon, or is a demonic thing. So am I going to go out and say this is demonic, this is a bad thing? Not necessarily, but I think this is something that is like a good positive thing? Not really. I think the whole Ultra Right beer brand is really stupid. I don't think anyone should drink beer, especially if you're a man. Hops are very estrogenic. So if you're drinking beer, it's empty calories, it's estrogenic, so it's going to mess with your hormone system, and alcohol is just a literal poison, so it's bad for your liver. So consuming beer, even if it's beer pushing a message that you ideologically agree with, right? If you're a conservative, you're right wing, and you think like, well, Bud Light shit, I'll just drink Ultra Right beer and I'm winning. I guess, there's a cultural win to that, but you're not doing your body any good if you're consuming alcohol. So I don't support a beer brand on that basis, and I'm not a conservative. I'm a libertarian. I think anyone who's a libertarian isn't necessarily going to identify with conservatives, so I'm a bit surprised that someone who calls themselves a libertarian would be associating themselves with a conservative branded thing. But that is just me. Of course, everyone's entitled to do their own thing, and I think Josie's picture, like I said, is the least scantily clad, the least offending. The thing is that she's, associating herself with like the, Riley Gaines in the bikini, the other girls wearing halter tops and short shorts and all those sorts of things, and she's, signing off and saying that's okay. And Bryson Gray and other people disagree with it. I do not think this is the most productive thing in terms of winning the culture war, going after what Ultra Right beer is doing, because they're not the ones they don't have the most foothold in it. Now, of course, you have this consistent, moral, code where you say, being lustful is incorrect, right? And that applies to anyone who's committing acts of lust or trying to, do things that would make men lust after you or lust after women in general, I suppose. But like I said, it's about picking your battles. It's about being as productive as possible with the amount of capital you have, that being, time, resources, whatever it is. Using those resources and directing them at taking down the people culturally who need to be taken down a notch, and those are people who I would say exclusively are left wing, the gender ideologues, the pedophilic communists that have invested every major institution, not necessarily some conservative beer company that did a calendar that would appeal to heterosexual men who used to drink Bud Light. I do not think that's the most productive thing. And again, is it a calendar that I personally buy? Would I personally endorse it? No, I wouldn't. I do think it's a bit I think it's a bit stupid, but I don't think it's any better or worse than a typical pinup girl calendar, and I think that's what they were going for, and I think that's what they achieved, and I think it appeals to a lot of people. So I'd say it's culturally effective in that sense. And of course, being a complete freaking prude is never going to do you any good, especially in today's society. So you've got this balancing act you need to play between pure sexual repression and like a complete lack of inhibition sexually. Where if you go to one side, you're going to engage in toxic hookup culture and treat sex as purely transactional. On the other side, you're just going to have people think very negatively and awfully about sex, and then you'll just lead into repressing your sexual desires, and then they express themselves in very toxic, dark, twisted ways that shouldn't have ever happened if you were able to get them out in a healthy, productive way or constructive way. So that's my basic take on this, and I think this is really showing there's a lot of divide between rights and conservatives, people who say that they're conservatives. There are more sex positive conservatives, there are more sex negative conservatives. You've got the neocons, and you've got the boomer cons, all these sorts of, I forget exactly how the whole conservative movement breaks down, but you've definitely got a huge swath of people who call themselves conservatives but think about the world very differently. And this is why Calendargate happened, and why it involved the Bryson Grays of the world versus the Josies and the Riley Gaines and whoever was for that side of the calendar. So you definitely have sex positive feminism, sex negative feminism, left leaning women who have a very positive or very negative view of sex, and that I would say extends out to right-leaning conservative people as well. So that is definitely an axis that operates independently of the right or left, and a lot of these things operate independently of the right and left. They just call it like being right-leaning. So like individualism, collectivism, that's its own political activist, and anyone who's an individualist is right-wing. Anyone who's a collectivist is left-wing. That's the basic overhead view of it. So right and left does really not complicates, but it tries to simplify and remove nuance from the complexities of human interaction. And that's what a lot of things in society these days, where we strip things of nuance. Everything's got to be black and white, good or bad, right or wrong, right or left, right? Instead of realizing that there are billions of shades of gray, and you've got to sit down and you've got to organize through them all. And I think this is where you have to go in with Calendargate. Realize that we live in a very different society than biblical Christian times or even 50 years ago, and you need to act accordingly. And I do think the ultra-right beer people were acting accordingly in terms of making this calendar. It was an effective tool. Like I said, I think the calendar is tacky. Well, I'll say this. I think the calendar is tacky. I don't think you should drink beer, even if the political values align with yours, because beer is bad for you. All alcohol is bad for you. But hey, everyone has their vices. But if you can limit the amount of alcohol you drink or cut it out altogether, then I would highly recommend that, which is why I really don't support ultra-right beer on that basis. And like I said, I think the calendar is just a bit tacky. If I am going to get a pinup girl calendar, it's going to be anime girls, because those are the best girls, right? A little bit of a joke, but I think I will end it there. I hope you enjoyed this one, and we're going to the outro now. Thank you for being in the Velvet Room with Joker the Fool. Be sure to follow my Substack, velvetroompublishing.substack.com, to read Machine to Man and all my other projects.